Irashaimase. Today I'm going to continue reading from Genji Monogatari. So here we go. This is chapter 2, Hahagiki, the Broom Tree. Hahagiki, I think it's actually pronounced, now that I think about it. It's a broom tree, is a plant from which brooms were indeed made and that had the poetic reputation of being visible from afar and disappearing as one approached. As the chapter title, it alludes to an exchange of poems between Genji and a woman who has frustrated him by making herself inaccessible. He writes, "I who never knew what it was the broom tree meant, now wonder to find the road to Sonohara led me so far from my way." She answers, "Stricken with regret to have it known she was born in a humble home. The broom tree you briefly glimpsed fades and is soon lost to view." In this chapter, Genji is now 17 years old. And he's friends with and a brother-in-law to Tono Chujo, who will be a major character. Shining Genji, or Genji no Kimi. The name was imposing, but not so its bearers many deplorable lapses, and considering how quiet he kept his wanton ways, lest in reaching the ears of posterity they earn him unwelcome fame. Whoever broadcast his secrets to all the world was a terrible gossip. At any rate, opinion mattered to him, and he put on such a show of seriousness that he started not one racy rumor. The Katana lieutenant, who would have laughed at him, or this character is also known as Katana no Shosho, while Genji was still a captain, he felt at home nowhere but in the palace, and he went to his excellencies only now and then. The household sometimes suspected his thoughts of being all in a hopeless tangle over another woman, but actually he had no taste for frivolous, trite, or impromptu affairs. No, his way was the rare amour fraught with difficulty and heartache, for he did sometimes do things he ought not to have done. The early summer rains were falling and falling, while at the palace seclusion went on, so that he was there even longer than usual. But although at his excellencies there was concern and annoyance, they still sent him clothing of every kind and in the height of fashion, and his brothers-in-law spent all their time at the palace in his rooms. One, Her Highness's son, and like Genji, a captain, was a particularly close friend, with whom he shared music and other amusements more willingly than with anyone else. The residence of the Minister of the Right, where the young man was looked after so gladly, thoroughly depressed him, and he had a marked taste for romantic forays elsewhere. Even at home he had his room done up in style, and in Genji's comings and goings he kept him such constant company that the two were together day and night for both study and music, at which he was nearly as quick as Genji himself, until he naturally dropped all reserve with Genji, told him whatever was on his mind, and treated him as a bosom buddy. It had been raining all the day long, and on into an equally wet evening. There was hardly anyone in the privy chamber, and Genji's own room seemed unusually quiet as the two of them read beside the lamp. When the secretary captain took some letters on paper of various colors from a nearby cabinet shelf and betrayed curiosity about them, Genji demurred. "You may look at the ones that do not matter. Some could be embarrassing, though." "But it is just the ones you think so personal and compromising that interest me," the secretary captain, or Tono Chujo, complained. "Even I get perfectly ordinary letters from ladies of one rank or another in the course of my correspondence with them. The letters worth reading are those sent when the writer was angry or when dusk was falling, and she anxiously awaited her lover's coming. Of course, as he well knew, Genji would hardly leave the important ones, the ones that must be kept secret, lying about on a shelf in plain view. He would have them put away somewhere out of sight, which meant that there must be of only minor interest. What a variety! He exclaimed, as he glanced over each, guessing at the sender and getting her now right, now quite wrong. Genji was amused, but with laconic replies he managed, in one way or another, to put his friend off the track and to hide what he wished to hide. You are the one who must have a collection, Genji said. I should like to see it. Then I would gladly open up this whole cabinet to you. I cannot imagine that I have any you would wish to read, Tono Chujo then took this occasion to observe. I have finally realized how rarely you will find a flawless woman, one who is simply perfect. No doubt there are many who seem quite promising, write a flowing hand, give you back a perfectly acceptable poem, and all due credit enough to the rank they have to uphold. But you know, if you insist on any particular quality, you seldom find one who will do. Each one is all too pleased with her own accomplishments, runs others down, and so on, while a girl is under the eye of her adoring parents, and living a sheltered life, bright with future promise. It seems men have only to hear of some little talent of hers to be attracted. As long as she is pretty and innocent, and young enough to have nothing else on her mind, she may well put her heart into learning a pastime that she has seen others enjoy, and in fact she may become quite good at it. And when those who know her disguise her weaknesses and advertise whatever passable qualities she may have, so as to present them in the best light, how could anyone think ill of her, having no reason to suspect her of being other than she seems? But when you look further to see whether it is all true, I'm sure you can only end up disappointed. He sighed portentously, whereupon Genji, who seemed to have reached on his own at least some of the same conclusions, asked with a smile, But do you suppose any girl could have nothing to recommend her? Who would be fool enough to be taken in by one as hopeless as that? I am sure that the utter failure, with nothing to commend her, and the one so superior as to be a wonder are equally rare. When a girl is highborn, everyone pampers her, and a lot about her remains hidden, so that she naturally seems a paragon. Those of middle birth are the ones whom you can see what a girl really has to offer, and find ways to distinguish one from another. As for the low-born, they hardly matter. His apparent familiarity, sorry, I guess I can't talk today, with his subject aroused Genji's curiosity. I wonder about these levels of yours, though, the high, the middle, and the low. How can you tell who belongs to which? Some are born high and yet fall in sync to become nobodies, while common gentlemen rise to become senior nobles, pride themselves on the way they do up their houses, and insist on conceding nothing to anyone. How can you draw the line between these two? Just then the chief left equerry, and the Fujiwara aide of ceremonial came in to join the seclusion. Tono Chujo welcomed both as enterprising lovers as well as great talkers, and they went straight into a heated discussion of how to tell women of one level from those of another. They told some astonishing stories. This Tono Chujo declared on the subject of those who rise high without being born to it. Society does not actually feel quite the same about them, despite their rank. While as for those who have once stood high, but now lack means, times turn bad, and they decline, until they have nothing left but their pride, and suffer endless misfortune. Either group, I think, belongs to the middle grade. Even among those known as governors, whose function it is to administer the provinces, and whose grade is certainly fixed. There are actually different levels, and these days you can find considerable figures among them. What is a pleasure to see, more so than any mediocre senior noble, is a man of the fourth rank, qualified for consultant, with a solid reputation from no unworthy stock, and with an easy and confident manner. His house boasts every luxury, and all those daughters of his, showered with love and dazzling wealth, grow up in grand style. Girls like that often do better in palace service than you might imagine. I suppose the thing is to keep an eye out for a father with means, Genji said, smiling. Antono Chujo grumbled. I do not know how you can say that. It does not sound like you at all. When a girl's rank at birth and her reputation agree, the chief equerry observed, when she commands general respect but is still disappointing in her person and her behavior, you obviously cannot help wondering sadly why she turned out like that. Of course, when her personal qualities match her rank, you take them for granted and are not surprised. The highest of the high, though, are beyond my ken, and I'd better say nothing about them. Anyway, the really fascinating girl is the one of whom no one has ever heard, the strangely appealing one who lives by herself, hidden away in some ruinous, overgrown old house. Because never having expected anyone like her, you wonder what she is doing there, and cannot help wanting to know her better. Her father's a miserable fat old man, her brother's face is none too prepossessing either, and there she is in the women's quarters, far at the back, where you expect nothing unusual, proud, spirited, and giving a touch of distinction to everything she does. Even if she has her limits, after all, how could a surprise like that fail to delight anyone? Compared to someone truly flawless, she of course falls short, but for what she is hard to let go. He glanced at the aide of ceremonial, who seemed to take this as a reference to his own well-regarded sisters, since he kept his peace. Oh, come now, Genji thought. It is rare enough to find anyone like that among the highborn. Over soft, layered white gowns, he had on only a dress cloak, unlaced at the neck, and lying there in the lamplight against a pillar, he looked so beautiful that one could have wished him a woman. For him, the highest of the high seemed hardly good enough. They talked on about one woman and another, until the chief equerry remarked, Many do very well for an affair, but when you are choosing your own for good, you may not easily find what you want. It is probably just as difficult to find a truly capable man to uphold the realm in his majesty's service. But however demanding that sort of post may be, it takes more than one or two to govern. And that is why those above are assisted by those below, and why inferiors obey their superiors and defer willingly to them. Think of the one and only who's to run your little household, and you realize how many important things there are to be done right. Even granting that having this, she is bound to lack that, and that you have to take the good with the bad, very few can manage honorably. And so, even if I do not recommend pursuing women forever in order to compare them all, I can hardly blame the man who is starting out to make his choice, and who, to help himself make up his mind, looks around a little to find one he really likes, one who does not need him to tell her how to do every little thing. Things may not always work out perfectly, but the man who cannot bring himself to abandon a woman once he has made her his own deserves respect. And his constancy is also a credit to the women with whom he keeps faith. It is true, though, that my own experience of couples has shown me no especially admirable or inspiring examples, and you young lords who pick and choose among the most exalted, what height of perfection does it take to gain your approval? As long as a girl has looks and youth enough, she avoids anything that might soil her name. Even when composing a letter, she takes her time to choose her words and writes in ink, faint enough to leave you bemused and longing for something clearer. Then when at last you get near enough to catch her faint voice, she speaks under her breath, says next to nothing, and proves to be an expert at keeping herself hidden away. Take this for sweetly feminine wiles, and passion will lure you into playing up to her, at which point she turns coy. This, I think, is the worst flaw a girl can have. A wife's main duty is to look after her husband, so it seems to me that one can do quite well without her being too sensitive, ever so delicate about the last thing, and all too fond of being amused. On the other hand, with a dutiful frumpish housewife who keeps her side locks tucked behind her ears and does nothing but housework, the husband who leaves in the morning and comes home at night, and who can hardly turn to strangers to chat about how so-and-so is getting on, in public or private, or about whether whatever good or bad may have happened to strike him, and is entitled to expect some understanding from the woman who shares his life, comes to find instead, when he feels like discussing with her the things that have made him laugh or cry, or perhaps have inflamed him with righteous indignation, and are now demanding an outlet, that all he can do is avert his eyes, and that when he then betrays private mirth or heaves a sad sigh, she just looks up at him blankly and asks, "What is it, dear?" How could he not wish himself elsewhere? It's probably not a bad idea to take a holly childlike tractable wife and form her yourself, as well as you can. She may not have your full confidence, but you will know your training has made a difference. Certainly, as long as you actually have her with you, you can let her pretty ways persuade you to overlook her lapses, but you will still regret her incompetence if when you are away you send her word about something practical or amusing that needs doing, and her response shows that she knows nothing about it and understands nothing either. Sometimes a wife who is not especially sweet or friendly does very well when you actually need her. The chief equerry's far-ranging discussion of his topic yielded no conclusion but a deep sigh. "In the end, I suppose," he went on, "one should settle on someone wholly dependable, quiet, and steady, as long as there is nothing especially wrong with her. And never mind rank or looks, if beyond that she has any wit or accomplishment, simply be grateful. And if she lacks anything in particular, by no means seek to have her acquire it. Provided she is distinctly trustworthy and forgiving, you know she will gain a more superficially feminine appeal all on her own. A woman may behave with comely modesty, put up with things that deserve reproof, as though she did not even notice them, and in a word, affect prim detachment until something is too much for her after all, and off she goes to hide herself away in a mountain village or on a deserted stretch of shore, leaving behind a shattering letter, a heart-rending poem, and a token to remember her by. The gentlewoman used to read me stories like that when I was a boy. They upset me a lot. In fact, they seemed so tragic that I cried. But now that sort of thing strikes me as foolish and a bit of an act. Say our heroine has a legitimate grievance. She is still abandoning a husband who no doubt is very fond of her, and running off as though she knew nothing of his feelings, and all she gains from setting him and testing his affection is lifelong regret. It is simply stupid. People keep telling her admiringly how right she was to act until she is swept away, and all at once there she is, a nun. When she makes up her mind to do it, she is perfectly calm and cannot imagine looking back on her old life. Oh dear, I am so sorry. All those who know her say when they come to call, I had no idea you felt so deeply about it. Meanwhile, the husband she never really disliked bursts into tears when he learns of all this, prompting her staff and her old woman to say, There, your husband cares for you after all, and now look what you've done. She puts her hand to the hair at her forehead and despairs to find it so short. Self-control fails, she begins to cry, and she breaks down again and again each time she has reason to feel a new pang of regret, until the Buddha himself can only be disappointed with her. As far as I can see, half-hearted refuge in religion is more likely to get you lost in an evil rebirth than staying on in the mire of this world. Suppose this couple have strong enough karma between them that the husband finds and claims his wife before she has made herself into a nun. Even so, once they are together again, each is bound to worry about what the other may be up to next, despite the renewed affection that may come from their having lived through so much. Besides, it is silly for a wife to quarrel with her husband who is inclined to look elsewhere. Even if he is, she can always trust him to remain her husband, as long as his first feeling for her still means anything to him, whereas an outburst like that may alienate him for good. She should always be tactful, hinting when she has cause to be angry with him, that yes, she knows, and bring the issue up gently when she might well quarrel with him instead.
because that will only make him like her better. Most of the time, it is the wife's attitude that helps her husband's fancies to pass. It might seem endearingly sweet of her to be wholly permissive and to let him get away with everything, but that will only make her seem not to deserve his respect. It is too bad when, as they say, an unmoored boat just drifts away. Do you not agree? Okay, there's some good advice here, but no, this is me talking as the reader, but some of it, like, it sounds pretty specific. I wonder if the chief equerry has gone through this. Anyways, back to the story. The secretary captain nodded. It is bound to be particularly difficult when one of a couple suspects the other, someone otherwise loved and cherished, of infidelity. But although the injured party, being blameless, may well then be quite prepared to overlook the matter, things may not go so easily. At any rate, the best remedy when something comes between a couple is surely patience. This answer he felt applied particularly well to his own sister. He was therefore both annoyed and disappointed that Genji was dozing and had nothing to add. Having appointed himself the arbiter in these matters, the chief equerry continued his exposition of them while Tono Chujo, who was eager to hear him out, chimed in earnestly. Think of all this in terms of the arts, the chief equerry intoned. Take, for example, the joiner who makes what he pleases from wood. He may turn out bravely amusing things according to no set pattern, and for only passing minor uses, strikingly ingenious pieces that he keeps nicely attuned to fashion, so that they pleasantly catch the eye, and yet one still distinguishes him easily from the true master who works with success in recognized forms, producing furnishings prized for being exactly right. Or take another example. By the time a skilled artist in the office of painting is deemed qualified to design a whole work, it is not easy to tell at a glance whether he is better or worse than another. Startling renderings of what no eye can see, things like Mount Horai, raging leviathans amid stormy seas, the fierce beasts of China, or the faces of invisible demons, do indeed amaze the viewer, because they are convincing, even though they resemble nothing real. Yet quite commonplace mountains and streams, the everyday shapes of houses, all looking just as one knows them to be, and rendered as peaceful, welcoming forms, mingling in harmony with gently sloping hills, thickly wooded, folded range upon wild range, and in the foreground a fenced garden with such subjects as these, and there are many. The greater artist succeeds brilliantly in conception and technique, while the lesser one fails. In the same way, handwriting without depth may display a lengthened stroke here and there, and generally claim one's attention, until at first glance it appears impressively skilled. But although truly fine writing may lack a superficial appeal, a second look at the two together will show how much closer it is to what writing should be. That is the way it is in every field of endeavor, however minor. So you see, I have no faith in the obvious show of affection that women may sometimes put on. And I shall tell you how I learnt this, though I am afraid the story is a little risque. He moved closer to Genji, who woke up, while Tono Chujo sat reverently facing him, chin in hand. The chief equerry might have been a preacher, preparing to reveal the truth of existence, which was certainly amusing, but by now these young men were eager to share the most intimate moments of their lives. Long ago, he began, or mukashi, because that's how it's pronounced in Japan, or once upon a time. Anyways. When I was still very young, there was someone who meant a great deal to me. She was no great beauty, as I told you, and I, being young and inclined to explore, had no experience of staying with her forever, because although she was home to me, I felt I could do better. And so now and again I amused myself elsewhere. This drove her to a pitch of jealousy that I did not like at all, and became such a nuisance that I often found myself wondering why she was so intent on keeping me, since I was really no great prize. I felt sorry for her, though, and I began to mend my ways after all. It was like her to pour all her limited talent into accomplishing somehow for her husband things that really were beyond her to be so cautious about betraying her shortcomings, to her own disadvantage, that she looked after me very well indeed, so as to give me no reason for ever being dissatisfied with her. I had fought her headstrong, but she did as I asked and humored me quite well, and lest her lack of looks offend me, she made herself as presentable as she could, and hid shyly from strangers for fear of embarrassing me, meanwhile remaining so attentive that as we went on living together, I found myself well pleased, except for this one detestable failing of hers, which she could not control. Then I thought to myself, she seems desperately eager to please. Well, I must teach her a lesson. I shall threaten her, cure her a little of this failing, and curb her tongue. I assumed that as long as she really was that devoted, she would mend her ways, if I put on a show of being fed up and eager to let her go. I purposely acted cold and distant, and when she grew angry and accusing, as she always did, I said, "If you must carry on this way, never mind the strength of the bond between us. I shall leave and never come back. If you want to get rid of me, by all means, keep up these absurd suspicions of yours. If you want me to stay with you forever, you will have to be patient and put up with things that may offend you, and if you change your attitude, I will like you very well. Once I am properly established and carry some weight in the world, you will have no rival." I was pleased with my sermon, but when I boldly began to elaborate, she gave me a thin smile and had the effrontery to say, "I do not in the least mind seeing you through these years when you have little credit or standing, or waiting until you matter. No, that does not bother me at all, but I do hate the thought of spending year after year putting up with your cruelty in the vain hope that you will reform, and so I suppose it is time for us to part." Now I was really angry, and I began saying awful things that she could hardly accept. Instead, she pulled one of my fingers to her and bit it, at which I flew into a rage. "I can't go out in society wounded like this." "It's just a finger, bro." Sorry, that's my opinion. I roared, "My office, my rank of which you seem to think so little. Just how, my fine lady, do you expect me now to hold up my head up at all? As far as I can see, all that is left for me is to leave the world." And so on. Very well, I went on. "As of today, you and I are finished," and I started to leave. "Hurt finger crooked," I said. "Fingers crooked to count the many times you and I have been together. Show that this outrage of yours is certainly not the first. You can hardly hold it against me." Sure enough, she burst into tears and retorted, "Talk of outrages. When my most private thoughts I count up your own, I believe this time at last I must take my hand from yours." She and I had had a good fight, and although I still did not actually mean to leave her, I wandered here and there for several days without sending her a line. It was not until late one miserably sleety night after the rehearsal for the special Kamo festival, which is known as Kamo no Rinji Matsuri, as we were all leaving the palace, that I realized I had no other home to go to than hers. The thought of spending the night at the palace did not appeal to me at all, and I knew how cold the company of some coy woman might be, so off I went, by way of just looking in on her to sound out her feelings, brushing away the snow and biting my nails with embarrassment, but still assuming that on a night like this she would welcome me after all. Her dimmed lamp was turned to the wall, a thick, comfortable robe was warming over a large censer frame, all the curtains you would expect to find raised were up, and everything looked as though this was the night when she was expecting me back. Well, well, I thought, very pleased, till I noticed that she herself was not there. I saw only her usual woman, who answered that at dark she had moved to her parents' house. She had left no touching poem, no encouraging note, nor any evidence whatever of thoughtfulness or consideration. I felt betrayed, and although I could not really believe that her merciless complaining had been meant only to make me hate her, I was annoyed enough to entertain the idea. Still, what she had left for me to wear was even more beautifully made than before, and its colors were even more pleasing. Even after I stormed out of the house, she had still been looking out for my every need. Nonetheless, I could not imagine her to be serious about giving me up, and I did my best to mend things with her. But while she did not exactly reject me, did not pester me by going into hiding, and sent me tactfully worded answers, her attitude amounted to saying, "I cannot go with you as you have been. I will not have you back unless you reform." I still did not believe she would let me go, though,
and to teach her a lesson I said nothing about wanting to change. Instead, I put on a show of headstrong independence. She was so hurt that she died. That taught me that these things are no joke. I remember her as the model of a dependable wife. It was well worth discussing anything with her, whether a passing fancy or something important, a dyeing cloth. She could have been called a Tatsuta lady. At sewing, she ranked with Tanabata, and her skill at both made her a wonder. The chief equerry remembered her with feeling. I would have taken her faithfulness over her wonderful sewing, Tono Chujo remarked to lighten the conversation. I have no doubt her marvelous dyeing was a real prize, though. The simplest blossom or autumn leaves are dull and dreary when their colors fail to suit the season. That is why choosing a wife is so very hard. Anyway, the chief equerry went on, I was visiting at the same time a very gifted woman who made poems with genuine wit and grace, wrote a beautiful running hand, had a lovely touch on the koto, and had a way with everything she did, and since there was nothing wrong with her looks either, I kept my scold to feel at home with, and secretly went on seeing this other woman until I was quite attached to her. After the one I told you about had died, I was of course very sorry, but now that was behind me, and I saw the other one often until I noticed, as I had not before, that she was inclined to be vain and flirtatious, and so to my mind not to be trusted. After that I visited her less, and meanwhile I discovered that secretly she had another lover. One beautifully moonlit night in the 10th month, I was withdrawing from the palace when one of the privy gentlemen joined me in my carriage. I myself meant to spend the night at the Grand Councillor's, but the fellow insisted he was concerned about a house where someone was expecting him that very evening, and the place was just on the way to where she lived. You could see the lake through a break in the garden wall, and it seemed a shame to go straight past a house favored even by the moon, so I got out as well. He must have arranged it all with her beforehand, because he was excited when he sat down on the veranda. I suppose it was of the gallery near the gate. For some time he watched the moon. The chrysanthemums had all turned very nicely, and the autumn leaves flitting by on the wind were really very pretty. Taking a flute from the fold of his robe, he began to play and to sing snatches of You Will Have Shade, and so on, while she accompanied him expertly on a fine-tuned wagon that she had all ready and tuned. Now, wagon is not a wagon. I mispronounced that. It's a musical instrument. The two of them were not at all bad. The Ricci mode, softly played by a woman from behind blinds, sounded like the height of style, and in the brilliant moonlight the effect was very pleasant indeed. The delighted fellow moved right up to her blinds. No footsteps seemed to have disturbed the fallen leaves in your garden, he teased her, and then picking a chrysanthemum, with all the beauty of a house filled with music and a lovely moon. Have you yet successfully played to catch that cruel man? I would never have thought it of you. Do play on, though. You must not be bashful now that you have an audience eager for more. To all this shameless banter she replied archly, Why, I have no words to play to keep by my side music of a flute that joins in such harmony with the wild and wandering wind. Little knowing how distasteful a show she was putting on, she next turned a sonokoto to the banshiki mode and played away in the best modern style, and very nicely too. But I was thoroughly put off. The come hither ways of a gentlewoman you meet now, and again may have their charm for as long as you continue to see her, but when you are calling on someone you do not mean to forget, even if you do not do so all that often, anything silly or loose about her can put you off, and that is why I made that night my excuse to end it. Looking back on those two experiences, I note that even then, young as I was, I found that sort of uncalled for forwardness strange and upsetting. In the future, I will no doubt feel that way even more. Perhaps your lordships take pleasure only in the tender, willing fragility of the dewdrop, fated to fall from the plucked flower, or in the hail that melts when gathered from the gleaming leaf. But I know you will understand me once you have seen 7 more years pass by. Now, he's apparently actually 7 years older than Genji, so
I've been using the wrong kind of voice. We'll just say he's a smoker. I'm joking. Please take my humble advice and beware of the pliant, easy woman. Any slip of hers can make her husband look a fool. Tono Chujo nodded as usual, while Genji smiled wryly in seeming agreement. From what you say, you made a fine spectacle of yourself both times, he remarked. They all laughed. I will tell you a fool's tale, Tono Shujo said. I had secretly begun seeing a woman who struck me as well worth the trouble, and although I assumed the affair would not last, the more I knew her, the more attached to her I became. Not that I necessarily visited her often, but I never forgot her. And things went on long enough that I saw she trusted me. There were, of course, times when even I supposed she might be jealous, but she seemed to notice nothing. She never complained about how seldom I came, even when it had been ages. Instead, she acted just as though I were setting out from her house every morning and coming home every evening. This touched me so much that I promised never to leave her. She had no parents, which made her life difficult. And it was quite endearing, the way she showed me now and again that for her I was indeed the one. Once, when I had not seen her a long time, she was so quiet that I rather took her for granted. My wife, as I found out only later, managed to send her some veiled but extremely unpleasant threats. I had never imagined anything like that, and at heart I had not forgotten her, but she took it hard because she had had only silence from me so long. And what with her painful circumstances, and you see, the child she had as well, she finally resorted to sending me a pink. He was almost in tears. But what did her letter say? Genji asked. Oh, you know, nothing very much, really. Yes, ruin has come to the mountain rustic's hedge, but now and again, oh, let your compassion touch this little pink with fresh dew. That brought me straight to her. She was as open and trusting with me as ever, but her expression was very sad, and as she sat in her poor house gazing out over the dewy garden and crying in concert with the cricket's lament, I felt as though I must be living in some old tale. I answered, I can never choose one from the many colors blooming so gaily, yet the gillyflower I feel is the fairest of them all. I set aside the pink for the time being, so as first to soothe her mother's feelings, with no speck of dust, and so on. She replied mildly, to a gillyflower brushing a deserted bed with her dewy sleeves, autumn has come all too soon, and the sorrow of its storms. And that's where I'm going to leave you guys. Actually, I'll just read a bit further, just to end the page. I saw no sign that she was seriously angry with me, because even when she cried, she shyly hid her tears from me as well as she could, and her keen reluctance to let me see she knew I had neglected her made me so sure all was well that I again stayed away for a long time, during which she vanished without a trace. Life can hardly be treating her kindly if she is still alive. If she had just clung to me in any obvious way while I loved her, I would never have allowed her to disappear as she did. Instead of neglecting her, I would have looked after her well and gone on seeing her indefinitely. The little pink was very sweet, and I wish I could somehow find her, but so far I have not come across a single clue. This is a small illustration of just what you were talking about. She seemed so serene that I never knew she was hurt, and my lasting feeling for her went completely to waste. Even now, when I am beginning to forget her, she probably still thinks of me, and has evenings when she burns with regret, although she has no one to blame but herself. She is a perfect example of the woman you cannot keep long, and cannot actually depend on. The only spoiler I'll give you guys is that that's Yu Gao, a very important character later, and someone too good for Tono Shujo. But that's all I've got for you guys right now. I wish you all the best. Take care. And don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button, as it'll help the channel a great deal. And until next time, sayonara.